December 7th, 1941, a date which has lived in infamy. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor shocked America and propelled the United States into World War II. But why did Japan choose to strike first? Why target Pearl Harbor specifically? Today we're exploring the complex web of geopolitics, resources, and military strategy that led to this momentous decision. By the late 1930s, Japan had embarked on an aggressive expansion campaign across Asia. The island nation, lacking natural resources, saw imperial conquest as the path to self-sufficiency and great power status. This expansion, particularly into China, put Japan on a collision course with Western powers, especially the United States. Japan's leaders knew that challenging Western dominance in Asia would eventually lead to conflict with America. The question wasn't if, but when and how this confrontation would occur. What pushed Japan toward desperate action was a severe resource shortage. As an island nation with minimal natural resources, Japan depended heavily on imports, particularly oil, rubber, and steel. These materials were essential for both its civilian economy and military operations. When Japan invaded French Indochina in July 1941, the United States responded with a devastating oil embargo. This was a critical turning point. Without American oil, Japan's reserves would last only about 2 years, and much less if engaged in active military operations. Japan's leadership faced a stark choice: either abandon their imperial ambitions and withdraw from their conquered territories, or secure alternative resources by seizing the oil-rich Dutch East Indies, today's Indonesia. Seizing the Dutch East Indies would certainly trigger war with the Western powers. And here lay Japan's central strategic problem: how to prevent American interference with their southern resource grab. The Imperial Japanese Navy knew they couldn't win a prolonged war against America's industrial might. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had studied in the United States, famously warned that Japan could run wild for 6 months to a year, but after that, their prospects were dim. This time, constraints shaped their strategy. If Japan couldn't win a long war, they needed to strike hard enough to force America to negotiate peace. This meant crippling America's ability to project power in the Pacific, specifically the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. Why strike first? The decision to attack without a declaration of war came down to 4 key factors. Tactical surprise. Japan's naval leadership believed they could only succeed with complete surprise. A declaration of war would eliminate this advantage. The Southern Operation. Japan planned simultaneous attacks across the Pacific. The Pearl Harbor strike was timed to protect their invasions of the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies. Naval tradition, surprise attacks had served Japan well before, particularly in the 1904 to 1905 Russo-Japanese War, when they attacked the Russian fleet at Port Arthur without warning. Window of opportunity. American intelligence had broken some Japanese codes, and Japan's leadership feared their attack plans would be discovered if they delayed. Admiral Yamamoto conceived the Pearl Harbor attack as a high-risk gamble that might give Japan a fighting chance. By destroying the U.S. Pacific Fleet, he hoped to buy time for Japan to establish a defensive perimeter across the Pacific, seize vital resources from Southeast Asia, inflict such a psychological blow that America might accept a negotiated peace. But the attack was fundamentally based on a miscalculation. Japan's leaders underestimated American resolve and industrial capacity. They also failed to destroy vital infrastructure at Pearl Harbor. The repair facilities, oil storage tanks, and submarine base remained largely intact. Most critically, all 3 American aircraft carriers were absent during the attack. This stroke of luck for the United States would prove decisive in the Pacific War that followed. The decision to attack without warning transformed what might have been a regional conflict into a war of national survival for the United States. The surprise nature of the attack united American public opinion overnight, eliminating any chance of a negotiated settlement. President Roosevelt's Day of Infamy speech galvanized American determination to achieve nothing less than unconditional surrender. The surprise attack meant there would be no compromise peace, exactly the opposite of what Japan had hoped to achieve. Japan's decision to attack Pearl Harbor first reflected both strategic calculation and desperate circumstances. Faced with resource strangulation and military containment, Japan's leaders chose a preemptive strike they hoped would knock America out of the Pacific long enough to establish an unbreakable defensive perimeter. Instead, the attack awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve. The tactical victory at Pearl Harbor led to strategic defeat as the United States' enormous industrial capacity and national determination ultimately overwhelmed Japan's limited resources. The lesson of Pearl Harbor remains relevant today. Military surprises may yield short-term advantages, but they can provoke reactions far beyond what the attackers anticipate, turning tactical victories into strategic disasters.